document on human fraternity. He said, "The Catholic Church teaches that the love of one's neighbor is inseparable from the love for God, which is also hinted at in the Quran, which says, 'People, we created you all from a single man and a single woman, and made you into races and tribes so that you should get to know one another.'" Pope Francis consistently raises the importance of getting to know one another through interreligious dialogue. He cites three main approaches: encounter, accompaniment, and friendship. As a path to our common humanity, he promotes a culture of encounter, cultivating goodwill, recognizing each other as brothers and sisters, and grounding our actions and our speech with human dignity. We begin with tolerance and move to a deep level of respect for one another, encountering each other with a spirit of openness. We welcome differences and do not fear the other. We speak our faith and listen to others who believe differently, allowing our hearts to be opened by what we recognize as, quote, "a ray of that truth which enlightens all people," close quote, as noted in the declaration from the Second Vatican Council in Nostra Aetate. True encounter also means that we look to the margins with real purpose, with intentionality, as we welcome the stranger, going out of our way to travel, to meet those whom we do not yet know, as perhaps we did this evening. Encounter requires from us a certain humility, of admitting that we know that we do not know and that we have much to learn. Pope Francis also speaks of accompaniment as a hallmark of interreligious dialogue. To accompany each other is to walk together on that path of our common humanity. That is a pilgrimage, a journey undertaken with spiritual intent. To accompany each other as we seek a path of our common humanity is to be on pilgrimage together. As we walk along this path, we listen to each other's stories. We share meals. We may walk for a while in silence. On our pilgrimage, we may stop and notice the beauty of the earth, look with wonder to the night sky, laugh. We may cry together. To truly accompany each other opens our hearts as we genuinely share our human journey. We allow ourselves to become vulnerable and to trust each other. We become friends. Pope Francis speaks of interreligious dialogue as leading to true friendship, authentically being present for each other in good times and in bad. In real friendship, our Christian and Muslim communities have come together recently to support one another after horrific acts of violence. The attacks at mosques and churches and synagogues here and across the world compel us to raise our voices and stand together for peace and in peace. We stand together in solidarity, in prayer, listening to one another, being present with reverence for the sacredness of our humanity. At times, we also challenge one another because we must and we can, because that's what good friends do. Help me to understand. I see you. I hear you. Virtues that we cultivate on our path, our pilgrimage together, are those of humility and mercy, generosity, forgiveness, and love. These also help us live a life filled with joy and wonder each day. For we are then enveloped within the one quality that is the hallmark of profound faith: kindness. It takes strength to be kind. Being kind to one who is kind to us is how we begin. Offering kindness in response to a harsh or cruel word or action takes strength and courage. It takes faith. It takes love. It takes humility. It takes compassion. Being kind to one who is cruel opens a door for change and the possibility of an outcome of peace. It allows us to see in our brothers and sisters the woundedness from which all cruelty springs. Kindness carries the possibility to halt the cycle of hatred and violence and invites us into a new world where the sacredness of our common humanity is lived. A spirituality, a way of living that reflects our relationship with God, offers kindness to the world. It builds us up. Our faith in a loving and merciful God radiates out through us and into the world, creating peace. Our kindness to one another shows God's face to the world, one that is filled with love and possibility. Kindness is the great sign of faith being lived out loud. Kindness empowers us to live with meekness, which is the ability to take a step back willingly in order that another may take a step forward. It sustains us on the path of encounter, accompaniment, and friendship. Approaching the conclusion of this reflection, I would like to offer two thoughts. First, 800 years ago, in the spring of 1219, and in the height of war, Francis of Assisi made a pilgrimage to Damietta and met Malik al-Kamil, the Sultan of Egypt, who, instead of having him killed, welcomed him and his friends. with grace and kindness. Francis and his followers stayed several days with the Sultan and enjoyed his hospitality. While no actual record of their talks exists, it is known and believed that each of them was transformed by their encounter and spoke of their faith, this Muslim and this Christian. So astonishing was this visit that it is remembered today in story and even in film. A path of peacemaking emerged with them. Encounter the other, face to face. Learn how another's experience of God animates their life. Allow your love of God to be known in your actions and in your words. Today, Saint Francis of Assisi is known and beloved by Christians around the world for his gentleness, his kindness, and his great love of God. I would like to offer this prayer, which is attributed to him. While we know he did not actually write it, it reflects his faith and his relationship with God. It is an example of his Franciscan spirituality, a path to our common humanity. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let me sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. O Divine Master, grant that I may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. It is in dying that we are born to eternal life. And finally, I believe that our gathering here tonight is pleasing to God, for we have chosen to be together. We have chosen to recognize each other's great dignity as brothers and sisters created in the image of God. And so, right now, I would like to ask each of us, right where we are, to please stand. Let us look around this place, filled with the shining faces of those beloved by God. Look around. Let us stand together here now in solidarity with one another. Together, we stand for peace. Together, we stand for those who suffer every day. We stand for immigrants and refugees. We stand for those without a home who live on our streets and at our borders. We stand for those who are ill in body or mind. We stand for those right here in our communities who are in need of food, and for the children who go to sleep hungry every night. Together, we stand for those who face violence every day in their neighborhood. Together, we stand for those who grieve the loss of family and friends through violence. Together, we stand for those who have died. We stand for those working for peace in every family, every neighborhood, and every nation on earth. We stand for those who are lonely and afraid. Together, we stand with love, for our very presence is prayer. We stand together in peace and for peace. We stand together now for a few moments in silence. Salam, peace, and every good. Thank you.
How do you come back here after such a season? Most Muslims, when they go on a pilgrimage, we go to Mecca. And that's very common. It's something that's expected at least once in a lifetime for the Hajj. Otherwise, we go on the smaller pilgrimage known as the Umrah. So most of us like to go. It's a spiritual renewal, and it does wonders for us. My husband and I were a little crazy, and a couple of years ago we decided to go to the Vatican. And a lot of our friends were just like, I don't know, will you feel welcome there? How will people treat you there? Are you sure you know your dress is going to make you stand out? And my husband has a beard, and people were worried, generally worried. And we went there, and I want to share what an amazing experience we had. Not just by the locals, but by the people of the church itself. When we went into St. Peter's, no one made us feel uncomfortable. Clearly we weren't Christian, but we were still welcome. And no one looked at us in a way that made us uneasy. In fact, the most profound experience we had was praying at the Vatican. And why do I say that? Because as I think most people know, Muslims are required to pray 5 times a day. The prayer, the Asr prayer came in. It's the midday prayer. So my husband and I are like, okay, now where do we pray? We didn't know where to go, we didn't know what to do. We had our little portable prayer mat, and we're just like, okay, we just find a corner and put the prayer mat down and began to pray. So I prayed, no issues, got up, my husband took the prayer mat and started his prayer. And right then, a father was leaving one of the church doors with about, I want to say 10 to 15 teenagers following him. And he saw my husband pray, and my husband was in a corner kind of blocking his way out. And the kids got antsy. They're kids. they're just like, how long is this going to go on? And I don't understand Italian, but I could tell from her gestures, because Italians have amazing gestures, that they were getting a little antsy. And I got nervous, and I'm like, oh my God, we're creating a scene. But the response of that priest was profound. He told the kids, and again, I don't speak Italian, but I understood. He said, just like we're praying to our God, he's praying to God as well. Let him pray. So they waited the 5 minutes it took. And then after my husband completed his prayer, the priest went and actually shook his hand. And I can't tell you how much that meant to us. So now whenever somebody asks us about visiting the Vatican, we say you must. Go and get to know one another. So I also have to acknowledge a couple more guests that we have. We have Kevin Messi, Vice President, Mission and Spiritual Care Advocate, Aurora Health. We have Jawad Hussein from the Beit Ilm. We have Ali Yurtsever of Islamic Society in the Midwest. And we have Brother Shoaib Qadri from ICN. So thank you to our honored guests. And finally, I get to introduce somebody who I am just beginning to learn from. And I've only had one class with him, but my husband and I were blown away. So we're so excited that Yusuf Keswit is here. He is the chair of Islamic Studies at the University of Chicago Divinity School. His research areas include Quranic studies, medieval intellectual history of North Africa, and Al-Andalus, the 99 divine names, and Muslim perceptions of the Bible. His most recent book, The Mystics of Al-Andalus, Ibn Barajan and Islamic Thought in the 12th Century, is an examination of the formative period of mysticism in Islamic Spain. Born in Egypt and raised in Morocco, he is fluent in Arabic, French, and Spanish, and has studied with Muslim scholars in Morocco, Syria, and Mauritania. Please help me welcome Dr. Yusuf Keswit.
اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. A few words right before Iftar. This is tough. And after such a beautiful talk by Susan and beautiful prayers, I'm lost for words. Thank you first of all for having all of us here. Thank you to CIOGC, to the foundation here, for bringing us together at this beautiful event. I wanted to build up or pick up on this idea that you pressed very beautifully, Susan, of faith being lived and manifesting itself. All right. Did people in the back not hear me at all?
That's much better.
All right.
Hold it closer.
All right, so I'm grateful to be here. I'm lost for words. It's about Iftar time. I'll try to keep myself and those who are fasting awake. I wanted to build on a beautiful point that Susan described in her talk about faith being lived in the form of kindness. Kindness as a form of realized faith. My own work at the University of Chicago, I studied the medieval period, and the more I hear about the contemporary period, the more I'm happy to be studying the medieval period. Specifically, I work on the 12th century, which would be 12th century at Andalus, which is present-day southern Spain and Portugal. And like now, Muslims then lived in a divided world, plagued, much like today, by factionalism, inequalities, economic instability, and political turmoil. They lived side by side often, but not all the time. Many of the communities in Spain were bilingual. Many were in touch with other communities of faith, Christians, Muslims, and Jews, and they had high moments and also low moments. And many of the prominent religious leaders of the day failed to nourish and really relate to the communities that they served, especially during the moments of deep distress. So internally there was a lot of division, and externally, of course, you had piracy at sea. People trying to go on the pilgrimage couldn't do it in the 12th century because of the pirates at sea or the Crusades blocking various roads and attacks from the Conquista from the north. It is a very difficult period. Now, in this divisive atmosphere, I studied a new school of Islamic thought, a distinctive indigenous mystical tradition that grew out of Al-Andalus, out of southern Spain, in this very difficult time. And the members of this tradition called themselves the contemplatives, the Mu'tabirun. And they emphasized withdrawing from the world. And I know that's not a very popular thing to say right now, standing at a place where we're really trying to engage the world. But just hear me out for a second, because they had a very profound impact, and there's a lot to learn from how they reacted to the problems of their day. So they believed in the inculcation of what they transmitted. So you have the transmitted tradition, the Naqli tradition as it's called, and then the Tahqiq tradition, the tradition of realizing and living one's faith. And they believed in taking both very seriously, being transmitters of the tradition in the fullest scholarly sense of the term, which takes time and takes withdrawal from the world for a bit, and also embodying it so that they can live it and realize it. And they came to the realization that, first of all, in order to change the problems of their day, they had to connect very profoundly with their tradition and with nature. And so they emphasized withdrawing from the noisy cities of the 12th century to the pristine outskirts of places like Seville, to focus on nature. And they came up with these remarkable insights into the ways in which the scripture, the Quran, intersects with nature and reflects nature and reflects the human self. So they thought in terms of patterns, where the scripture, the book of nature, the book of the self were all different keys to sort of tap into as they developed their consciousness of God in day-to-day life. Now, this was the first place where Muslims actually opened the Bible to understand the Quran, and they didn't open it non-polemically. It's a very interesting moment in the history of Islamic thought. Because up to this period, whenever a Muslim would engage with the Bible, it was with a view to proving that the Prophet of Islam, Muhammad ﷺ, his religion supersedes and abrogates the previous revelation. So it was with a view to opening up other books to prove supersessionist theology, basically. The Mu'tabirun had a very different approach. Theirs was to investigate the Bible in order to fill in lacuna that the Quran doesn't expand upon. For instance, the Quran does not elaborate upon the 6 days of creation. It mentions it, you have a handful of passages, but the book of Genesis is much more explicit about it. So the Mu'tabirun, when you open their commentary on the Quran, they actually used the Bible for non-polemical ends. In other words, they weren't trying to do anything but improve their understanding of their own text. But from a space of exclusivism, they weren't trying to promote some sort of universalist understanding of religion. No, they were very convinced of the core foundations of their tradition, but from that space, they engaged with the religious other. And so that, instead of searching for common ground, what they did was they tried to refine the level of disagreement. And I think that's an important lesson for us as we promote common ground. It's also to promote a culture where we can talk about our uncommon ground at a very high level. Because often the disagreements and the clashes result from a very low level of disagreement. And so what we can do is raise that level of disagreement so that we have a much more refined understanding of where we stand and where the other stands. So these Mu'tabirun, the way this contemplative tradition in Al-Andalus, in this context that I tried to describe, they recognized, and they write about it, that the problems of their age were too large for an individual scholar or a single generation or a single organization or a nation to solve. So they committed to struggle against the challenges that they faced for the sake of God, and they drew their energies from these core insights that they found within their tradition, trying to relate to the book of nature, to the book of Revelation, and contemplating the human self. And their ideas gained ground and laid the foundation for a remarkable flourishing of Islamic philosophical, mystical thought that has continued to shape the conversation of Islam to the present day. So, when they talked about realized faith, as Susan put it beautifully, faith as being lived faith, manifesting in, for instance, in kindness, for them, that notion of realized faith was the fruit of a real deepening of their understanding of their tradition. And it went parallel. It was like the fruitional result of engaging profoundly with their own tradition, so as to transmit what was transmitted to them. So you have communities of faith, and in our case the Catholic community and the Muslim community, sustained and bound and nourished by a foundational sort of body of teachings that we hand down from generation to generation. And members of a faith community cherish those traditions because they originate, contain, transmit a moment of divine intervention in human history that we would call revelation. Now, the greatest product, to stress this point, the greatest product of this transmitted tradition is embodied faith, is realization, is virtue, service. Just to serve entails to have inculcated a lot of virtue. You have to be selfless, you have to love, you have to really be able to withstand a lot in order to give of yourself and therefore receive. And so they talked about realized faith as a foretaste of the realities of the hereafter and a counterpart to the revelation. So you have the revelation, which is in our context, in the Islamic context, it's the Quranic revelation on the one hand, which then, when the revelation stops, the transmitted tradition begins, right? And once that begins, the reaction of every believer is to realize it, is to do tahqiq. And so that realization is not the exclusive property of any individual group or members or clique within the tradition, and it's achieved by each member to varying degrees. It's lived, it's realized, and it's the response of human engagement with the transmitted tradition. And that's what revitalizes the transmitted tradition to which, the traditions to which we belong. That's what inspires the most powerful cultural, artistic, and literary expressions, and that's what left a mark in Al-Andalus, in 12th century Spain, on later generations. And so these contemplatives contend that only those with a tahqiq, with a realization, in other words, an anchoring in their transmitted tradition on the one hand, and a foretaste, you might say, of the hereafter, can speak on behalf of that tradition. So to be an activist, let's say, or to actively go out there and speak on behalf of one's tradition entails a deep anchoring in what was transmitted, and also an embodied and lived realization of that transmission. And then from that space there is a sense of exclusivism there, but they're refining the levels of disagreement, raising the bar of where we actually agree, where we actually disagree, and that's our space. That's our common ground, really, is our ability to have those difficult conversations together from a space of transmitted tradition, and that's what will have a respectable sort of effect on the long run. So they, to restate just a fine point, and then just I want to touch on this idea of these contemplatives sort of withdrawing from the world. Now, in order to meaningfully engage societal problems, the contemplatives of Al-Andalus withdrew from the political sphere. They avoided roles of social and political leadership and lived in out-of-the-way villages where they consciously chose to develop their mystical tradition in the shadow of the state-sponsored religion, the jurists and the judges of their day. They mastered their transmitted tradition and drew an enormous amount of attention to them by seekers of knowledge who wanted their sort of a taste of their own erudition and their own realization of the tradition. And so, in deepening, you might say, their contact with their own traditions, they begin to venture into other disciplines. And they venture into many fields of learning. And they showed a keen interest, as I said, in the Bible. They were the first to quote the Bible, to comment on the Quran, in order to understand the Quran better. This is quite a remarkable moment in Muslim Catholic or Muslim Christian encounters in general. So their interest in the other came out of their own tapping into their own tradition. It didn't come out of a desire to find common ground as much as it came out of a desire to build on what they had, and perhaps to refine the disagreement that they had with their co-religionists, to raise that bar. And so you find them writing in various fields of learning, commentaries on the Quran, the structure of the cosmos, cyclical notions of time, and then this idea of correspondence between heaven and earth. And they claimed Abraham as their paradigmatic founder, as the founder, because what did Abraham do? He looked at the heavens and the earth and the signs of God in nature, and from that arrived at a concrete certitude and faith in God, and became the founder of monotheism. Now, in describing these sort of far-out teachings, correspondence between Quran and Book of Nature and so on, one can easily lose sight of how their quest for deeper knowledge led to tangible societal change. How does that actually work? One could be dismissive and suggest that these contemplatives decided to move inwardly, to escape the world of becoming and the world of problems, as a way of closing themselves off from society and shutting out the suffering of their communities. They could be brushed aside as eccentric mystics who fled the world, settled in the backlands of places like Seville, and had no direct bearing or influence on the lives and tribulations of the common believers. And when you read their abstract doctrines, and I spent 10 years doing so, you start losing sight of their actual societal impact. But their response was as follows. First, they believed that tahqiq, realized faith, is what keeps the world itself turning, and that the power of prayer attracts divine mercy. In the midst of the turmoil, this idea tangibly manifested in the fact that the community of faith sought these people out instead of the state-sponsored scholars and judges and jurists and so on, because they weren't frazzled or swayed or compromised or seduced by the climate of their day. And you can't tap into an energy like that and face the world as it is with all its raw aspect without having a repose of soul, which comes out of this realized tradition. And so their repose of soul was a source of communal support. And that takes a lot of work. So that's one of their first responses to, are you just fleeing to the mountains? Second, despite their political quietism, and they were quietists in the sense that they did not believe in direct engagement with the political sphere, they died some of them died as political prisoners, which meant that they actually were perceived as threats because they were so popular. They drew so many people. So many were drawn to them at a difficult time. And so they recognized that long-lasting change doesn't happen within a decade. And it begins by changing oneself. So they began to work within. For change in the world is preceded by change in the self. So they may not have seen the fruits of their own labor. The efforts may have not been tangible in their own lifetime. But in the long run, their efforts paid off. As the dynasties began to switch and the political scene began to change, later scholars will look back at these aloof mountain, dwellers and take inspiration from what they wrote to develop later conversations in Islamic thought. So the point that I drew from this entire study, that the book is called The Mystics of Al-Andalus, is that as we engage with one another, as we engage with other, within our own traditions, where we have a very, very alarming lack of fine disagreement. You can barely disagree among ourselves, not only to talk about disagreeing with religious others. So in this sort of quest for common ground, my conclusion was that there has to be first of all, some withdrawal from the world in order for there to be a kind of tangible impact, and that the two don't necessarily contradict each other. That's about all I have to say.
So thank you to all of our incredible speakers and all of you who took time out of your busy schedules. We know it's not easy to come on a weeknight, and we know that it takes a tremendous amount of heart to show solidarity in these difficult times. And we truly appreciate that, and we want everybody who is here to know we do feel from our hearts that you are our brothers and sisters, and we hope the feeling is mutual. And on behalf of Islamic Foundation of Iftar Uncle doesn't mind me sharing, you are always welcome to come here. Our doors are always open to our neighbors. We absolutely enjoy at every level interacting with our interfaith partners. If anyone would like to further an interfaith relationship, Azam Nizamuddin is our chair. Please reach out to him. We are always looking to do that. And very shortly, you will hear the call to prayer, which will signify the opening of the fast. So we ask that you enjoy these few final moments before the fast. Traditionally, Muslims reflect at this time, and at the ending of the day, we quietly pray and ask God for whatever it is that we need and we'd like. So we ask that you join us in prayer individually, and then at 11 you will hear the call to prayer, at which time we ask everybody to once again join us in opening our fast and having dinner.
قد قامت الصلاة قد قامت Paris doesn't